Welcome to the Future of You. Today I'm speaking with Jack Connor, a tech entrepreneur and language enthusiast. His latest project aims to deposit endangered language data into the Arctic Code Vault. The project aims to create AI models of vulnerable languages, ensuring cultural and linguistic heritage is preserved for future generations. In this chat, he highlights the rapid disappearance of languages due to the globalizing, homogenizing effects of the internet, and discusses the importance of, and challenges with, language preservation, and how AI is key. We also consider language revitalization, with Jack sharing his own personal experiences. Jack speaks at least 7 languages and has travelled extensively. We also go a bit more sci-fi, envisioning real-time AI-driven auto-translation tools that could alleviate the pressure on major languages in the future. Of course, language and identity are, totally interrelated, so that is always at the heart of this conversation. As you listen to this chat, picture Jack in the Arctic, as that is where he will be by the time we go on air. And if you'd like to get in touch, help out with the project by providing audio recordings or even cell phone video for the language deposit, or have any endangered languages or dialects that you care deeply about and want to suggest to him, I'll leave all the details in the show notes. Jack Connor, welcome to the Future of You.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. It's an honor and great to be here.
No, it's brilliant to have you here, Jack, because unusually for the guests I have on here, I'm not 100% familiar with your work. I mean, I know about it. Theo Priestley put me in your direction when we're talking about something on Twitter, and I'm so glad he did, because your work is absolutely fascinating. And of course, language and the intersection of language and identity is incredibly interesting, nuanced and complex. So I wonder if we'll start off by you just explaining to the audience who you are and what you're doing and why you're going to the Arctic.
Those are great questions. Great questions. Well, yeah, thanks for the intro. I'm Jack Connor, based in outside Los Angeles, and I'm going to the Arctic to deposit a reel of AI data and language data. It's about 550 languages worth of data into this Arctic code vault that's impervious to EMPs, is 250 feet below the permafrost. For the listeners and for you, most people are familiar with the global seed vault. It's that for data, and they're literally neighbors. They're right next to each other. It was built as sort of a response to the global seed vault. I'm a language lover. I've always loved languages. I lived abroad a lot when I was a teenager in my 20s. And as an American, this is a little more unusual, I think. And so my background is tech, as a lot of people are probably on, like programmer. I was CTO of a couple different Silicon Valley startups that did pretty good, but I always did language stuff as kind of on the side. The combination of these two is kind of what got me into language preservation of endangered languages. As I continued to work and sort of explore, one of the big topics that I started to take a lot of interest in and didn't see quite so much action around is the fact that languages are disappearing much, much, much faster than at any time in history. This is essentially because of the internet, and it's mostly a good thing. I had coworkers in Brazil who spoke perfect English because they played Counter-Strike all day or watched Netflix all day and could get jobs that paid way higher than local rates, and it was awesome. This is globalization. There's pros and cons, but I think there's a lot of good stuff. But one of the negative things is it is quickly pushing out a lot of local languages. We're doing a project in Panama right now with Ngave, which is a language down there that's spoken by about 200,000 speakers. So we're building some tools to put in a hospital there, because they have a big translator shortage. People come into the hospital, have a problem, but there's nobody who can do the interpretation work. So we're going to build like an app that has like some text to speech and things like that. But it's an example of a language, and 200,000 is actually a lot of speakers, but you have a lot of languages like that where if you're growing up in that culture, is it more valuable to learn English or Spanish, or is it more valuable to learn your local language? So of course, like English and Spanish, because you can get jobs, things like that. So you just have a lot of pressure on these tiny little niche local languages, of which there's estimated to be 7,000 in the world. And the pressure is, inherently causing a lot of them to disappear. Here in California, there's, many, many, many indigenous languages, but, 100 years ago, there used to be 5-ish times as much, or, something along those lines. And these days, there's also a lot of these languages have, 5 to 20 speakers, and the average age of the native speakers is over 75. This is something that I think most people just don't even think about, for good reason. But it's something that's really quickly happening. It hurts me as someone who just loves languages. I have lots of thoughts about, language and how language affects how we, pattern our thinking and things like that. But the other side is, in a more tangible way, we're starting to do very interesting research. We're throwing a bunch of AI at language data and discovering things like whole civilizations that we didn't know existed, because you triangulate from etymologies, or finding out that for a long time there was an argument whether Sanskrit and Indo-European, that it was an Indo-European language. Linguists, don't get mad at me if I'm getting this slightly wrong, but basically trying to figure out, was European languages and Sanskrit related? And for a long time, people said no, and then we found out recently the answer was definitely yes. So we're sort of at this point when we're opening up all these cool, amazing, research-oriented tools we can use languages for. Our languages are starting to disappear.
How do you save or preserve these languages, and how do you sort of turn them into a data in a format that can be preserved? Talk us through a bit of the details, because it's fascinating.
Yeah. Perfect world if a genie came out of a lamp and said, Jack, you can have anything you want with this project, I would have it create an AI of every accent and a ChatGPT clone in every language in the world, and maybe go back in time and get a ton more. This is never going to happen. So for the preservation is for a lot of these little language, there isn't a lot of things. Have you heard of the disappearing internet theory? It's kind of like a highfalutin sort of title for the fact that essentially just old websites are disappearing.
Oh, Brian Rammel's been tweeting this a lot, hasn't he? Saying there's 2 million, this was fascinating, there's 2 million academic papers that have just kind of disappeared. So if you're following the footnotes, suddenly you come to the end, because they've been hosted on websites that have disappeared, or the actual papers have disappeared. So yeah, is that what you're talking about?
Mm-hmm. Well, with a lot of niche languages, this is a huge problem, because to give you an example, here in California, there's a language called Korea. There's a couple variations of it. And there's a revitalization effort going, but it's teensy tiny little language with, a couple dozen speakers. But if you go and try and find, grammar books, dictionaries, things like that, there's a couple online, and they're being hosted on what is basically a WordPress site being run by a 2-person nonprofit, out in the, kind of Joshua Tree Desert. And if that site goes down, there goes, 85% of everything in that language, because there's so little data for some of these languages. And so if you're looking on a time frame of, 5 years, it might still be there. 50 years, probably not. 500 years, really, who knows? So for some of these small languages, and I said on this first deposit we're doing is 554 languages worth of data. For some of these, it's just PDFs of dictionaries, grammar books. We have a partner named WikiTongues, who has probably the biggest collection in the world of niche language audio and video. So if nothing else, if Tracy, if you spoke, were one of the last speakers of, a very niche language, if nothing else, we want to get audio, some grammar, a dictionary, and then any, basically any papers or information I could find huge research project, but for some of these, there's just not much. And most languages are oral languages too, meaning they really haven't left a lot of physical data. But we get what we can, because again, from a linguist standpoint, it's important. Like, one of the sad things is if you have an oral language that doesn't really have any written content, and the last speaker dies, like, that's it. Like, there is no coming back. It is gone from the face of the earth, and you will never be able to recreate it ever again. So if nothing else, I want to make sure we got representation for that, for those, hence the breadth of this project, because we were able to get, there's a lot of languages where we effectively grabbed everything that was on the internet, but everything that was on the internet is, maybe a couple 100-page PDFs and some white papers from some linguists and stuff like that. But then on the other side, like on the, for some of the languages that have more extensive things, the goal is honestly to build AI so that our children could be great, as they could knock on some box and some AI genie pops out and talks to them the way they talk to us, or, some kind of interface, or, whatever the case may be. But basically so that they could know, oh, this is what Grandma Tracy sounded like. This is, how language worked back then. And, as an example, if we discovered a ChatGPT style LLM in Latin, it would be the find of the century for many reasons. But from a linguistic standpoint, it would become basically the most important thing that every grad student on the planet would study. All the other stuff that we study would become peripheral to that. So that would be my goal. But, it's very resource intensive, especially for these languages that don't have vast libraries of content. You need to actually collect a lot of data.
But how do you find out where these languages are? Obviously you work in this space, but are you kind of uncovering new or unknown to you languages all the time? Or as the world, do we know all the languages? Or are there still discoveries in language to make?
Oh, there's so much. And I would challenge everybody out there. I guarantee you there's some niche languages within 50 miles of you that you have no idea exist. I tell this to people around me in LA, there's half a dozen indigenous languages that are still spoken within 30 miles of Los Angeles. Not spoken by lots of people, but there are native speakers, and they'll have a little museum, and there's a little bit of government money to kind of keep things rolling. It's just mostly off the radar. And part of that is it's very local. So our organization is focused on preservation, meaning we take basically we're trying to make, we're trying to save this stuff for the future, because the worry is that it's going to get lost, which is, a very strong worry. Most people in this space are actually doing what's called language revitalization, which is where they're trying to teach new generations to speak it. So you have, 5 native speakers now, but trying to increase the number of speakers and bring languages back. This is happening all over the world. You could think of in England, Catalan and Irish are two, excellent examples of where they, kind of brought them back from the brink, and now they're effectively bilingual cultures.
Yeah, or Welsh actually here.
Oh, really? Okay, I didn't know quite as much.
Well, it's not been at the brink, but people are very, as generations get older, they're very keen to make sure that, the signs are in both languages, and that Welsh keeps being spoken as we move forward. Yeah.
God, I love that stuff so much too. If you walk into a store and it has signs in 2 languages, I just automatically am like, this is more fun. So this is language revitalization. And this is happening all over the world. There's amazing stories. This happens best at a local level, where it's literally just, the elders teaching the kids. And we're going up to the Arctic. One of the things that we're going to do is visit the Sami in northern Norway. We got invited by a researcher up there. And yeah, similar, in the 80s and 90s, the number of Sami speakers was really low. And earlier it had been kind of discouraged and everything. And then apparently these days it's, almost bilingual in a lot of places. But that can only happen through kind of slow growth and these education programs and parents that want to speak it at home and things like that. So that's revitalization, and that's amazing. So we're not doing that ourselves, but we work with a lot of groups. I mean, essentially anyone who's doing that, like, we are fully in support of.
Yeah. I think it's so important for identity, because this is where the intersection is, I guess, for like the technology and identity and language and society, in that if you don't have access to the language, if you believe that language defines reality, then you don't have access to your own history, in a sense. So, then there's this strange sort of space that we're in, which is very present all the time when things are digitized. Like, people aren't quite sure. The future is very uncertain. Some people are better at conceptualizing it than the others. But the past is constantly being, particularly in the West, denigrated, sort of challenged. That's fine, but if you're going to lose things from your past forever, then how does one sort of have any continuity and self-continuity with your past, either sort of individually or as a tribe, or I mean, in the metaphorical sense, that as a society, as a culture, you can't reach back into the past. And I think this is one of the things that some people are really finding it quite difficult and a challenge to sort of navigate. Who are they? If you don't have a strong connection to the past for whatever reason, and language is a really important way of doing it, obviously, then you're potentially a little bit lost, knowing your place in the world. I don't know if you agree.
Oh, totally. 100%. I mean, I don't go as far to say that language affects, everything about how you think, because there's too much evidence where there's, Spanish speakers who are this way and Spanish speakers who are also that way, and stuff like that. But speaking of, though, I mean, when I speak Spanish, I personally feel much more extroverted. Maybe that's just a me thing. I don't know. But, a lot of people make observations like that. But I do think there's something to the fact that how you speak and the language you use will affect how you think, and kind of certain tendencies that you have. And I also, with you, like, I can only speak for myself personally, but 100%, I think our connections to languages in the past is like a big deal. Like, I did 23andMe and found out I'm 75% Irish. And I don't speak any Irish, but it's still, it made me much more want to learn Irish. Like, there's such a strong connection between language and culture that to lose that, I mean, it's a little sad, but it's also like, it feels like it's missing a big part. And another big thing with this project too is, these tiny little languages that are in danger of just, kind of poof, disappearing off the face of the earth because there's so little presence in the first place. But if you were the person and you found out, it turns out, like, my grandpa was, spoke Luxembourgish, which is a language I actually didn't know existed until a couple of weeks ago when we did got a little mini library together. And then you went to go be like, oh, that's interesting. Let's go look that up. And then, found that there was some information about Luxembourgish. Maybe you don't learn the whole language, but it becomes another piece of kind of this whole stew, It's like knowing your history, like knowing where you came from.
It's an ancestral connection, I think, that once you cut it, you're sort of left a little bit adrift, potentially. It's so interesting you say that about the internet, because the internet does have that capability to sort of flatten everything out. We've talked about this a lot in terms of identity, that it kind of creates this homogeneity, and anything that's kind of interesting or very unusual is flung to the kind of sidelines and ends up on the periphery. What do you think the internet specifically is doing to language? I mean, you sort of summarized it there, but what's the detail? How does it work? What happens with either an indigenous language or even a language that's not, spoken, majorly? What actually is the effect of the internet, or our use of the internet?
I think you said it proper, flattening. Accent flattening. Accents are disappearing like crazy. People in the States, people in Texas talk a lot like people in California now. So one story is I grew up in Chicago, and Chicago has a really strong accent, and I had a really strong accent. We say Chicago. I moved to California, and about the first 6 months, people pointed out my accent all the time, and I made zero effort to get rid of it. I was actually liked my Chicago accent, But then after 6 months, people stop pointing it out. So I just naturally kind of like flattened, sort of probably lost a couple aspects. I definitely stopped saying the word pop and pop machine because people would make fun of me like crazy for saying that for a soda. And I think that the internet causes that to happen at large scale. So flattening, and then on the like niche languages, it really disincentivizes. There's a couple places. I mean, you have like your Facebook groups, and there's like indigenous language Twitters and all kinds of stuff like that. Like there are places to go, which is great. But I think the overall effect is kind of pressure towards the major languages, putting a lot of pressure towards English here. If you're in Asia, a lot of pressure towards Mandarin, a lot of stuff being done in Mandarin.
I was going to ask you about that. What are the insights about, Asia and Mandarin, or what's happening in China? Young people used to be told to, learn Mandarin because that's going to be the most useful for you. But I'm not sure that's the case anymore because of the potential for even more sort of decoupling between the West and the East. I mean, it's always been America as the superpower, speaking English. So that's the major language that everybody automatically learns. But is that the case going forward?
This is a great time for me to make an argument for learning a niche language too. Because personal experience, I lived in Barcelona for a year. I was a young student skateboarder. Loved it. Barcelona is like possibly the greatest city in the world to live when you're like 21 years old. I did not know that most of my courses would be taught in Catalan. And so I had to learn Catalan like really fast. But it was great. I loved it. I tell people that and they're like, what's the point of learning Catalan? There's like 1 billion Spanish speakers and there's 8 million Catalan speakers, or 10 million Catalan speakers. Catalan has been more useful for me in business than Spanish, Italian, and French combined. Because every time I meet someone who speaks Catalan, and I can have a conversation with them, it's so unusual, and it's also such a kind of there's a bit of a compliment in there and things like that it really has like opened doors and stuff. So I would say for people who are trying to decide what language to learn, in response to your question, what are the kids being told? French kids back in the day are being told, I learn English because English is the language. And then 200 years ago, everyone was being told to learn French because it's the lingua franca. This is the language of international, politics and trade in Europe and everything. I would say don't follow trends. I bet a lot of people learned Mandarin who never went to China, but, did go on vacation to Germany and actually could have benefited from learning a bunch of German, even if it didn't seem like, it was the quote unquote strategic move. Language isn't really about numbers. It's about meeting individuals. So I honestly, for that question, I tell people learn the language you're most interested in the place that you're most interested in going, because there'll be way more advantages if you learn a language that you actually use with people than one that, is sort of this theoretical, maybe this will be good for business one day.
About 10 years ago, people were saying, don't learn a language, learn code. Code is the new language. Obviously you're working in both areas. You are at the intersection of that. What's your point of view on that?
Kind of a weird thing to say in that the use cases are so different. I will say language, if you can learn to speak French, you can definitely learn JavaScript really easily, because it is kind of like a human language, but without all of the irregular. So language people do take to coding like a fish to water, but it's totally different. I mean, they're totally different jobs.
What do you think about these sort of generative AI models that are doing sort of translation on the fly? When you've got your avatar and I don't speak Japanese, but I can easily go and, log on to Hey Jed and do a little presentation. It claims obviously that it's me speaking Japanese then, but in my own accent. What's your view on these sorts of innovations?
So one is when we make LLMs from these niche languages, the first thing I'm going to do is try and force companies to put it into their software, so that, remember how I was talking about the internet pressure from major languages? The AI, translation stuff could be the solution to this. For my example, if you are living in Brazil and you speak English so that you can get a better job, That's great. But if in 10 years we have some auto translator where you don't need to speak English to do your Jira tasks and talk to your project manager, like it doesn't matter, you just have it translating for you, all of a sudden that pressure's gone. You don't need to have learned the language. It's handling it for you. And we can argue that, this wouldn't work for sales jobs. And I'm like, well, yeah, it probably wouldn't work for sales jobs because you want to have a personal touch or something. But if you're coding up apps and stuff, I could definitely see a world where this layer of machine translation, again, just takes off this pressure. And then all of a sudden, you don't need to learn English, but maybe you're going to learn your parents' language, or whatever the case may be. So I think that that's a really good thing. And I think that as we start to see this integrated better throughout society, I think we got to the point where machine translation just hit the still quite crappy but barely acceptable for prime time in some cases. But as we know from technology, that usually means that you're about 5 years from it being pretty damn good. So I really like that aspect of it. And so, for example, if we finished, this Navajo LLM, that's one long range project we're doing. I would love to put pressure on Netflix to be like, dude, we have a translator. You don't have, the money makes sense. Go translate your shows right now. That, and again, it's taking the pressure off. It's making more languages available. And I think that you apply this throughout society, and I think it's an awesome thing. My vision for the world is when you walk up to a McDonald's kiosk or whatever, it has every language on earth that you can put it in. Not because it's absolutely necessary. I wouldn't argue that's crucial to the functioning of society, but I think it will do a lot to start solving this problem.
Maybe in some megacities, though. I mean, if megacities do grow, it's like 2030, there'll be a third more megacities, and they are really populous. Maybe it's about the context again, maybe the location. You wouldn't have it elsewhere, but maybe in a megacity where people are in and out all the time from lots of different countries, it would be incredibly efficient. Is your project global in scope?
Oh, yeah. If you took this deposit we're doing now, or we're going to do in a couple of weeks, if you put it on a map, it would be pretty evenly spread, with actually a higher concentration in Africa and Latin and South America, because there's just a higher concentration of languages.
Oh, I wanted to ask you about Africa. Because obviously, if you think about sort of the population trends as well, obviously the replacement level's so low with the population in the West, but it's really, really high in Africa, something like 7 in Nigeria. So is that surely is going to have an effect, isn't it, on the kinds of languages that become the major languages that are spoken, or will they stay, do you think, in their local environment? How did languages sort of move and shift like that?
I mean, this is a question people debate. Why is English the dominant language? Was it because the British, history of colonialism, or people argue it's because English is inherently better? One fact about English people bring up is English has never not had the highest vocabulary of any language on earth. Even before, it was the dominant language. And so there's people who argue there's something inherent to English that causes it to spread, which I think is kind of bullshit personally, but
I think it's very special and true.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a great, but it is, Borges has some famous quote about how English is the language of poetry because there's so many more words you can use to describe things that are, very descriptive and everything. But in terms of population dynamics, one of the reasons there's so many languages in Africa is because there's so much isolationism. I mean, there was obviously trade throughout Africa, but in a way, if you found a tribe of people who spoke a language no one had ever heard in England in 2024, it would be fairly shocking. If you found it in the Congo, it would be less so, just because of the nature of the geography and the politics and everything. So, yeah, languages and isolation go hand in hand. A big question is, into our previous thing of, if you have, so much, as right now, it protests in England, right, about immigration and anti-immigration and anti-immigration or whatever, let's say snap your fingers and England becomes 30% Arabic speaking. What does that mean linguistically? Does it remain English speaking? Does it become bilingual? Do we start teaching Arabic in schools? Does that become just its own subculture where it's more like, oh, there's Arabic private schools and sort of the equivalent of like Arabic like Sunday schools and things like that, but you don't actually like learn. There's a lot of ways these things can go, and authoritarian attempts to tell people how to do language. People don't really like being told how to talk. I hate when people try and tell me what words to use and stuff like that. And have you seen like Catalan and Basque and all of these, like the top-down stuff doesn't really.
Even in Ukraine, like banning Russian being spoken, things like that. I mean, I think wherever that kind of happens, it tends to make the population want to speak it more.
Just pisses people off.
Exactly. Yeah, because it's an expression of identity.
So that's kind of my take. And then sometimes these things turn into creoles. Maybe in 20, maybe in 50 years you'd have like an English Arabic new language. Like who? So I think the ability, I think predicting there's too much black swan potential and too much randomness to make accurate predictions, but enough to make fun predictions. This could happen, that could happen, that could happen.
Yeah, we always love to do our scenarios. Now, tell me, what about non-human language? What about, will I be able to save and then understand or preserve the language of my dogs here?
I hope so. There's a couple articles that came out from Harvard Business Review where they're trying to analyze whale. And I read the paper. I would say that what they're calling whale grammar is a little bit of a stretch. I think it would be good if the aliens came down, because at least it would put a little humility into us as a species. I think that might be kind of healthy for us to not be the only intelligent people around. And I would love to talk to my dog. I think one of the things there, if we could crack that communication, if I can answer the question semi-seriously, I think it would be brilliant, because I think we would realize it would, if all human language is between, 5 and 15, it would be interesting to find something that was like at 150, that was still language, but was so far outside of what, kind of how we humans think and stuff like that, that I think it would cause us to rethink a lot. I'm a bit with, I know everyone likes to disprove Chomsky with some good I love the guy, but not all of his theories have held up perfectly. But one thing he said that I do agree with is, if the aliens came and analyzed human language, they wouldn't say we have 7,000 languages. They would probably say we have one language with 7,000 accents. And I would add on that I actually think they would include music as part of the language spectrum. So I argue music came before language. Well, I think it's almost definitely true, because of the fact that like you could play a sad tone for anyone around the world, they'll recognize it as sad, versus a happy, upbeat, Beach Boys. They might not love it. It might not be in their wheelhouse, but they would recognize it as like a happy song. So this stuff is built into us. And if you think about like evolutionary terms, birds, things that communicate, all emotional communication is going to help us as a species over non. So even the ability for me to say, I'm sad, I'm happy, to communicate these basic feelings was beneficial. And as far as I can tell, this is the origin of music. Actually, music is still insanely like mysterious. As an art form, no other art form grabs us as emotionally, where you can literally feel it in your chest.
Yeah, connection to the divine. Yeah, and nobody can explain it beyond that. Are there certain languages that either have existed or still exist that are more inherently more emotional than others? I'm thinking about, when you hear about things like, there's 50 words for snow, or
the Inuits, yeah.
The Inuits, yeah. Are there languages that can't capture certain emotions in the language, or certain languages that do have a plethora of different expressions or phrases or words to capture a certain emotion? I was just wondering about the kind of continuum is for that.
Oh, absolutely. Lots of languages have that 50 words for snow for something. This is probably the most famous example. Languages that have more colors, i.e., like instead of saying green and blue, but they're like, green, turquoise, aqua, aquamarine, blue, deep blue, But for us, we think green and blue, and then those are kind of subcategories. There's a lot of languages where they just divide things more for whatever reason, and I'm sure like the Alaskan Inuits had that with white. I bet their words for white, they had one to go with each form of snow, right? What has been proven is that they can pick out those colors much, much, much better. If you showed them a color spectrum and said, choose all of the different colors, they could, where us, we would look and just see like, well, I see white and then I see gray. They could go and say like, this is that kind of white, that's that kind of white, that's that kind of white, that's that kind of white. So if you have a language that emphasizes something, whether it's color, and colors is a really common one, you practice it way more and you get way, 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 way better at it.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned about aliens earlier, in jest probably, but Arrival is one of my, top 3 films. Oh my God. Amazing story, amazing storyteller, amazing movie made of the story. But would you think we would be able to communicate with aliens? Or are you even looking at that as the sort of what might be the languages of outer space or interstellar languages?
Oh, I hope so. I think one of the things that movie did really well was point out how different in one way, where first you're like, oh, they don't speak the language, they draw the language. And there's, if you read a lot of sci-fi, which it sounds like you do, there's, in science fiction, there's aliens that draw, that use like sense of smell. They emit little pheromones. There's one, that have like little pressure zones. Everything you could possibly imagine to communicate could potentially form a language. So I think that would be incredible to, it'd be the linguistic research project of the century. And then also, I back to the way they think, and this is something. Arrival used the time, essentially like if you speak their language, you can sort of time jump, which may be a little extreme, but also I think was a really good, if nothing else, a great metaphor for just like how freaking different like this is gonna get. Like the aliens came, like it's not going to be Star Trek where they come down and we're trying to like decode a version of French. It's going to be like they're going to come down and do something that we don't understand is even language.
We talk about language, but communication more broadly could be in any way possible and beyond our imagination, I think. And that's how it's difficult to reach out and try and discover it, because you wouldn't know where to start. In what kind of way would you go about it? Is they're not going to speak like us? What haven't we discussed about your project, Jack, that we need to so that more people can sort of follow it? I know you've got a crowdfunder. We did have a crowdfunder. I know you've got investors in it. Where's it going next? What's the timetable for it?
Yeah, all successful.
Congratulations.
Yeah. So in a couple of weeks, we head to the Arctic to do the deposit. We're making a mini documentary about this. It's about endangered languages. I would encourage anyone to just investigate languages in your area. I would bet everybody out there that there's at least 1 or 2 tiny little niche languages within a couple 100 miles that they have no idea exists. And for our project, crowdfunding language data. If anybody out there speaks or has access to a small or niche language and would like to provide, literally like cell phone selfie videos and stuff, the easiest stuff in the world, but so that we have audio content. So we're always looking for stuff like that. And our partner, WikiTongues, and they're part of like the Wikimedia Foundation and all that. They host these things. So yeah, niche language speakers reach out, language dorks, hit me up on Twitter. Love to talk. And I mean, honestly, thank you for letting me come on and talk about this. Like I said, it's a topic not many people even think about. So being able to kind of get the word out.
No, it's so important because time is the issue with this. We will run out of time. And it's all very well. People are great with these sort of endeavours going, well, we'll do it then. You've got to do it now, haven't you? It's urgent and important.
Absolutely. That's what we're trying to do. Well, thank you so much, Tracy.
Not at all, Jack. It's absolutely brilliant to speak to you and fascinating project. And we'll follow it along then on the Future Review. Everyone will follow the progress. And maybe when you come back from the Arctic, you'll come on again and we can you can update everybody how you got on. But we will follow the project with interest. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for listening to The Future Review, hosted by me, Tracy Follows. Be sure to check out the show notes for more info about the topics we covered today. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you know someone who would love this episode, please share it with them. For more on the future of identity in a digital world, visit futuremade.group/The Future Review. And to explore the future of everything else, head over to futuremade.group. The Future Review podcast is produced by Big Tent Media.